If you're not willing to feel awkward, if you're not willing to feel uncomfortable, you're going to stay where you are.
The need for boundaries often is to put yourself into a position to actually have the world reflect back your own self-worth and value in a way that you see it.
There's two different kinds of discomfort. There's the kind of discomfort of living in dysfunction that you've been living in for years and years and years. And then there's the kind of discomfort of change. You can't be completely broke and have like a 500 credit score and just walk around going, I'm rich, and not do anything else and expect your life is going to change. You have to take aligned action. So
Bingo.
You have to start living like a person who is rich. You have to start thinking like a person who is rich. Women have so many more options, but...
Welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now. I love to have the real, raw conversations with some of the most influential, impactful people on this planet. And sometimes you know their names, sometimes you do not. But what I love is that every single one of them has a story that's relatable to you. See, when we can tap into the collective wisdom of humanity and learn and shorten our own curves of learning because of other people's stories, we have a really awesome chance to shortcut the time for ourselves in growth. And today I'm excited because Barb Nangle and I had a brief moment to interact on my live show. And she is a woman that self-identifies as being in recovery. And even after all of the years of active work in recovery that she's not only done for herself and for others, she sees it as an active process that she is always engaging in. A chance to go deeper, a chance to learn more, and not for the sake of the never-ending question of why, but for what she can do about it and what it frees up for her and for other people. In the short time I've spent with her, I can just feel her heart, her love, her desire to be transparent and real in a way that hopefully will be accessible to each and every one of you. And so, Barb, I'm super excited to have you here with us today.
Yay, me too. I'm really excited because that was amazing, that 15-minute thing. I can't imagine where we're going to go with this conversation.
Well, hopefully I don't let you down here. You know, sometimes those 15-minute ones set up high expectations, and we'll do the best we can to ensure this experience. But yeah. Barb, you know this next question is coming because you were on the other show. It's the only question I ask every guest on both shows is outside of however I've introduced you and whatever I've said about you, Barb, who are you in your words?
Yeah, I mean, who knows if I said the same thing before, but I identify probably first and foremost as a woman in recovery, like woman first. I definitely very strongly identify as a woman and a woman in recovery. That's the foundation of my life, and everything that I do stems from that, because I got into 12-step recovery at age 52 and it utterly transformed my life in ways that the decades of work I did before that didn't even scratch the surface of. And so I want those recovery programs to be here for other people. And I want the wisdom of recovery to get out into the world, even if people don't want to join 12-step recovery, because there's just so much wisdom there. So I would say that I identify as a boundaries coach. One of the things that I have realized through the process of recovery is I've always really craved attention, but I wouldn't even allow myself to admit that when I was younger. So now I'm like, give me a microphone and give me a stage and sit down and listen up because I like attention. And so I'm totally okay with saying I'm a boundaries coach and I'm a speaker and I have something to say that you might benefit from.
Yeah. You know, Barb, there's a part of me that just like intrinsically wants to like challenge in the way that you answered that question, but I'm not going to. And I'm going to say why.
Okay.
I'm going to say why. Sometimes when asked that question, and it may have been the case on our live or not, I honestly don't remember the exact interaction in that question. However, oftentimes people will answer with what they do instead of who they are. And other than identifying as a woman in the beginning, right? Pretty much everything else you talked about is related to what you do today. And yet the very tail end of where you described why you're a boundaries coach is actually the nuance of who you are below it. And so even though sometimes what people do is a byproduct of who they are, we don't always clearly hear it in that same light. And yet you wrapped it in both. And so I'm only calling attention to that because at the surface, maybe not everybody picked up on that, but yet the way you answered why you're a boundaries coach is very much because of who you are and because of how who you were hurt you in prior periods in your life or caused the need for you to have to armor up or numb or avoid or any number of
All
other
of the
things,
above.
right?
Yeah.
That are all true within our human experience. And so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do want to pause though on one piece, and this is purely curiosity. And I hope you can hear it this way. There's zero challenge. There's no right or wrong. But you put extra emphasis on identifying as a woman. And above and beyond even just saying I'm a woman, you slowed down with the intention to especially make sure that we knew that you identified as a woman. What is it about your experience, or why is it that you believe that it's so important for you to clarify that and put such emphasis on your identity and role as a woman, especially above anything else?
Yeah. I mean, I think anytime I've ever been asked to say anything about myself, it always starts with woman. And, I'm 62 years old. I grew up in the 70s during the third wave of the feminist movement. I identified as a feminist starting at about 14. My mom was a secretary in the women's studies department at UConn. And patriarchy is alive and well. And so this body, this human, this soul walks around in the world as a woman in a bunch of systems, capitalism, patriarchy, racism, etc., that cause certain people to have certain kinds of experiences, some of which are privileged and some of which are marginalized. And so that just really explains a large part of my experience. Also, I'm a sociologist by training. So I can't let go of my sociological brain.
Yeah. Yet there's so many layers to what you just said. And I'm really grateful to how you just even handled that approach. You said patriarchy is alive and well. Some might argue it's surging at a rate that we've never imagined in some ways. And particularly as somebody, I want to explore this because you even said I was in that kind of third wave of women's rights and identified even as a feminist. I want to be really clear. I am the proud husband of an incredibly strong and capable woman and the proud father of a kick-ass little girl that is going to take over the world. And my bias almost always is coming through the lens of all of the ways I can understand what you just said. And through my own right, through my own lens, through my own parameters, I will never understand what it's like to be a woman, nor do I claim to.
True. Yeah.
But I do get to be an advocate and an ally in really effective ways, especially where I see it. But I want to slow down for just a second. And I don't want to make this political. I don't want to make this necessarily divisive, though I recognize that these topics in and of themselves can do that. Okay. So to whatever degree you feel comfortable or not, you can answer this where you want to go.
Okay.
In your lifetime, your own personalized experiences, somebody who identifies first and foremost as a woman, who fits all the descriptors of what you just said a second ago. What have you seen as it relates to the arc, evolution, ups and downs, as it relates to women's rights and the contrast of patriarchy or the perception of patriarchy or otherwise? However you want to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously changed, and it's changed a lot in my lifetime. I mean, when I was growing up, my mom was the only mom on the street that worked. All the other moms were stay-at-home moms. Yeah. And now I think that's probably flipped. There might be one mom per street that stays at home and probably has some kind of feelings about that, especially if she went to college and then chose to stay home and that sort of thing. So, that's changed. Opportunities for women have changed dramatically. Role models for women, because of the opportunities, have changed dramatically. A lot more men are identifying as feminists. The gender roles have changed dramatically. I still, to this day, am so in love when I see a dad walking alone with a baby down the street. When I was growing up, that would never happen. Yeah. It would not have ever happened. People would have thought there was something wrong there. So, gender roles have changed. I think, women have so many more options, but there's still a lot of things going on. So just to take, my work as a boundaries coach, I deal with mostly women just because I'm a woman and I feel like I identify with women's plight much better. But also, it doesn't mean that men don't have boundaries problems. It doesn't mean that men aren't codependent people pleasers and neighbors and fixers, but they weren't brought up to be nice girls. They weren't brought up to be told, you are supposed to be helpful. You're supposed to defer to the man. You're supposed to make everything around him. And even though I wasn't told that, even though my mom was a feminist, we lived our life around my dad and his needs, whether they were his career needs, his emotional needs, whatever it was. And that's changing for sure. So there's many things that have changed, some of which have changed on the micro level and some of which have changed on the macro level, but we still have a very long way to go.
Yeah. You are very diplomatic and appropriate in many of the ways that you are and how you choose language. And I so appreciate the intentionality in how you communicate about all of it. I had no intent of jumping right into women's rights.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know it was going there either. Who cares? Whatever.
But that's the beautiful part about this show is I love to just be able to see what comes up and to be able to explore from there. One of the things I did say, and it was a part of you in how you introduced yourself, right? Is this concept of a woman in recovery, right? And I'd love for you to be able to articulate what does it mean for you to be in recovery, and what has that either process or that continual evolution of recovery looked like in your life?
Yeah. So I am in 2 12-step recovery programs, one of which is called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, or ACA or ACOA, which I'd heard of it forever, never knew I qualified for. And the way I describe that program is that it's a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover from childhood trauma and the effects of intergenerational family dysfunction. And then I'm in another 12-step recovery program called Overeaters Anonymous. So I identify as a compulsive overeater and sugar addict. I am down over 100 pounds from my top weight, which is really just a bonus for me, because what happened is I went from being like obsessed and compulsive, and I'm not like that anymore. And I've also really cleaned up the wreckage of my past and learned like the reasons why I ate, why I drank, why I smoked weed and cigarettes, and why I was codependent and put myself in harm's way and all that sort of thing. So I identify as in recovery, and I specifically mean 12-step recovery. And, for folks who are not familiar with it, the first program of 12-step recovery was Alcoholics Anonymous. It came about in the 1930s. It was the first time in history that droves and droves and droves of alcoholics got and stayed sober. And so it was monumental. And now there are some 200 and something 12-step recovery programs. What people may not know is that they're actually spiritual programs. The idea is that you connect with some kind of a power greater than yourself. Even if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you're still welcome to come in the program. Yep. But it's imperative to find something that is greater than yourself. Often it's the power of the group. And so that, like, one of the things that I wish I had said when you said, who am I, is I am a spiritual woman, which to me means I recognize that I am part of something greater than myself. I'm not just a lone wolf floating around in the universe that's disconnected from everything else. I may feel disconnected, but I am not disconnected. Yep. And so for me to identify as a woman in recovery means I'm in a process that is never going to end, and to which I choose to participate actively, which to me means I continually am examining myself, my motives, my behaviors, my thought patterns. I help other people do that. I'm a sponsor in both of my programs. I get help from other people, so I have a sponsor. And then I also have fellow travelers who work programs of recovery with me. One of them, I talk to her once a month. And we just talk about like what's going on, but it's based in our recovery knowledge. I have another person I talk to twice a month, and we read out of recovery literature. I am always looking for another piece of recovery literature to work through. So I hope that answers your question. I'm happy to share
It
more,
does.
but I could literally talk forever about this. So I want to stop and let you
Well,
say
I'm
something.
sure that we're going to talk a bunch more in different contexts through the rest of this conversation, and maybe there will be more conversations after this someday, depending on the time and what ground we cover. Because yes, this is something we could talk about for days. And
Yeah.
you know, it's I so appreciate that you call attention to the specific nature of how you defined the spiritual programs. Right? I often try to help or suggest to people, don't let the lesson get lost in the language.
Yeah.
Right? Whether you call it God, the universe, the source, Allah, like whatever. Like what I really appreciate is the nuance and specificity that even if you don't feel connected, you are. Right? We all are. And that the way you said that and just the simplicity of that is really, really beautiful. I do want to explore a concept around this though. And when I say this, I want to also give a caveat that I'm not suggesting that this is the case for you.
Okay.
So please hear that this is a potential, but I'm not sure based on all of your language if it is. I agree with you 100% that there is no final destination, only constant evolution of self, right? There is always something else to learn, something else to do. But I also know, after being a childhood patient, how many childhood patients that becomes a part of their identity, right? They are a forever patient, right? And this nuance of saying that you are always in recovery is in some ways, or some could hear it as there's always something that is broken and always something that needs to be fixed. I'm always recovering from versus I am here and there's more. And so whether it's as related to your own relationship with this concept of recovery, or how you may guide and advise other people, just like a relationship with pain can be stagnant and fixed and cause somebody to do the same patterns over and over again, even the self-identification of a role like being in recovery can do the same thing. And so you've been in recovery, as you call it, for 10 years, right? You've covered a lot of ground. You've learned a lot of things. You've released a lot. You've grown. And yet you view yourself as still very much in recovery. I also feel like every day I'm a work in progress. But there's a difference because I don't view it through the lens of I'm actively healing or recovering in every single capacity anymore. There's times and places that the healing and the recovery take place because it's a part of the process. I know that was a really long tee up to a question.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to understand is, where does this concept of being in recovery attach to your identity as a forever place versus the contrast of acknowledging what you've already accomplished and celebrating where you are today as well? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And I would say, like, I sincerely hope that the majority of the work that I will do in my life is behind me. I really do, because it sucked. And it was painful. And it doesn't mean that I don't have painful experiences now. But what happens for me now is just, you know, I continued to get perspective shifts. Like, one of the things I started asking the universe, which I think I got from Rhonda Byrne, who wrote The Secret, was saying to the universe, show me my beliefs one at a time so I can see them clearly, just in the past year. And a few things came up. One, I really thought that I never really loved my father. And I think I told you before, I do a lot of reparenting stuff. And this one particular morning, I was doing this reparenting exercise, and I had this memory of being maybe 4, jumping into my parents' bed. My dad wasn't there. My mom was there, and leaning into my dad's pillow and just sniffing it. And for a millisecond, Brian, I got the scent of my father, and I knew that I loved him. I knew that, and I had like a visceral experience. That's part of my recovery. I'm recovering my innocence and my love for my father. Like, that is such it was a momentary thing, but can you imagine the impact of, at 62 years old, understanding and the reverberation into the past? I have always loved my father. So, like, that's just one example. And I also, my brother and I have been estranged for the last few years, and we've just recently, in the last couple of months, reconnected, and it has been amazing. And I would think, prior to reconnecting with him, I think maybe I love my brother, but I don't feel it. And the first time that I saw him in person and I was hugging him, I knew that I loved my brother. And I was hugging him and I said to him, I truly believed this would never happen. I truly believe that, because he was really, really, really down, like super bad. I think of him as being underneath a rock, and he's now crawled out from under the rock and is in the sunlight of the spirit. And I have done so much work that I can withstand whatever comes my way because I take care of myself. Like I have internal safety.
Yep.
And that notion of internal safety actually just came to me this year. I realized this is what boundary work is really about.
That's what it's for. 100%.
It's about creating a sense of internal safety so you can withstand the vicissitudes of life. I don't need people to approve of me or like me or not be upset with me the way that I used to. I want people to like me, but I don't with claws, need it the way that I used to. And part of it is that I actually really like me because I'm living in integrity with myself now.
Yeah.
And then also I just know that I can count on myself. And it was the boundary building process that got me there. Those are aspects of my continuing recovery. So I hope giving you those examples, those illustrations, it answers your question.
It absolutely does. And yet that's also why I suggested I don't believe that it's like you're in this state of I am a victim that's constant in recovery.
Right.
It is the acknowledgement of where you've come. But again, you're so intentional with your language. My guess in how I was receiving it is so much of the present state language is also to make your lessons accessible to others who may actively be in the state and who identify with different pieces. And it's all of it. But to even your point, things that may have derailed you before don't derail you in the same way anymore, right? You may feel them. You may have emotion around them. You may have a time that you need to process them, but you spend a lot less time and energy in that space.
Yeah, they don't take me down the way that they used to. And, I want to say one other thing about this identification as a person in recovery. So the way 12-step recovery works is part of step 12 is that we carry the message of recovery to those who still suffer. And what Bill W., the co-founder of AA, found was that this is the story that I heard, that after 6 months of carrying the message to other people, he came home to his wife all demoralized. And he said, I'm carrying the message and nobody is staying sober. And she was like, oh yeah, you are. And that's when he realized carrying the message of recovery is for me. Of course, I want other people to recover, but I do it for myself. And here's why. Because when I'm talking about recovery, I can't forget who I am, what happened to me, where I am now, and I'm going to hold on to that. And so one of my second sponsor that I worked with, I was complaining about him one time, how I went to this meeting and it was really unhealthy. And he's like, you're not going to that meeting to get recovery. You're going to that meeting to give recovery. And I was like, shit, that's a huge responsibility. But I can't do that everywhere I go. I can't. But if I go to a meeting and I'm never getting recovery from it, I'm going to go to a different meeting. But if I go to, all the meetings from time to, I get something from every meeting. I definitely do. But, I'm carrying the message because I want people to not go through what I went through. I had no idea I was an adult child. I had no idea I had trauma. I didn't know about intergenerational family dysfunction. I didn't know I didn't have boundaries. I didn't know that I had victim mentality. I didn't know that I lied all the time. I didn't know I was a compulsive overeater. I probably knew I had a substance use problem, but I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so many more things I just didn't know. And Brian, I was trying. I was trying. So I can't even imagine what it's like for people who are not trying. And then all of a sudden something happens in the middle of their life and they're like, wow, I think something needs to change. But they've done no work until they get there. I can't imagine what it's like for them. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarifying point on the 12th step and that in that whole point. If you relate it back even to the AA roots, it's once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. You are not an alcoholic just because you are not drinking, right? And that's the kind of concept that's also involved in this. I'm not somebody that doesn't deal with shame or doesn't deal with anger because I don't deal with it often anymore, right? It's why when people ask me who I am, I start with saying I'm a husband and father first. It's the only thing binary in my world. Why? Yeah. I've said this for 20 years, but my words, actions, and behaviors weren't always congruent to that statement. So today it's as much a reminder for accountability as it is for me to exist and ground it for what it really is now versus what I used to believe it was, but didn't have everything aligned.
Mm-hmm.
And so I so appreciate even your willingness to explore all of that.
Yeah, of course.
You know, you talk about all these results, right? These outcomes, these behaviors, these parts of your identity that you didn't know about until years later, right? And this is often the case for so many.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things I say to people is the trash from your past is not your fault, right? It just becomes your responsibility once you become aware of it,
Precisely.
or you start burying others in yours, because many times we're unconscious to it for decades of our life, even though we do feel yucky inside, we do feel like something isn't right, but we don't know how to get there. All of us have our own stories that get us there, right? You talk about where you're at in recovery and these byproducts of behaviors that developed over years. Take us back a little bit to the parts of your story that maybe developed these beliefs, these cellular memories that activated, these parts of your identity that you weren't even aware existed until years later. How'd you get there? And at what point did you identify, this isn't me and it's time to change?
Yeah, I'll start with the biggest paradigm shift of my recovery, which is coming out of victim mentality. And I have to say, Brian, I am not the quintessential victim that's like, woe is me, the world is against me, I can never win. I have never been like that. I've always felt like a powerful woman of agency. And I was shocked to learn that I had victim mentality. So my victim mentality wasn't that obvious the way I just shared. It was way more subtle. So it was, if only my boss would show up on time and follow through and did what she said she was going to do, then XYZ. Or if only, and I happen to date men, so if only he would have done that, or this guy would have done that, or that guy would have done that, then the relationship would have been okay. And I actually started to see it in my relationship inventory, that I was acting like I had nothing to do with the status of any of my relationships, that they were happening at me or to me. And so that was sort of the crack in the door that got me to start seeing the victim mentality. And then I realized, oh my God, it's not just in my romantic relationships. It's in my friendships. It's in my colleague relationships. It's with my neighbors. It's in my volunteer experiences. It's with my family. And I think, where that comes from, like in some ways, children don't have a lot of choices because they shouldn't, because they don't know how the world works and their frontal lobe isn't developed. But also, when you grow up in dysfunction and there's dysfunctional patterns that have been passed down, like my dad was very my way or the highway. He was very dictatorial. When I tried to push back, I got punished. And so, I think one of the best explanations for people who aren't familiar with victim mentality is they talk about, I don't even know if this is true, but I'm going to use it as a metaphor, that when they train an elephant for the circus, they start with a big, huge fat chain and they try to pull and pull and pull and they can't. And then they give up and then they switch the chain for a rope and the elephant doesn't even try to pull it when it could easily break the rope. That is victim mentality. It's like, I've tried, it doesn't work, so I'm going to give up for the rest of my life. And so, it's like, and what's interesting, Brian, is I feel pretty confident in saying every single one of my clients, or damn close to them, also has victim mentality. It comes with boundaries, because when you start learning how to set boundaries, you start making choices in your life in areas that you never perceived choices before. That's victim mentality. When you don't perceive that you have choices. So if somebody says, well, I can't call in sick to work because if I do, I'll lose my job, I don't have a choice. Actually, you do have a choice. It's a shitty choice. Call in sick and get fired, or go to work sick. But when you realize, oh, wait, this is a choice and I'm choosing to go to work sick, you get to let go of blaming the boss, the company, the policy, the healthcare industry, the federal government, and you get to just go to work and be sick and get out of there and go home and rest. But when you're going there and you're like, I can't believe this, and you start bitching and complaining with the rest of your colleagues and they do it too, you're all like, you're in this swimming pool of victim mentality. And you start to create that mentality. It just has this ripple effect. And I'd like to give another example. I was coaching this woman one time and she said to me, she was, probably 50 or so. And she goes, I inherited this family business from my dad and I was a single mom and I didn't have a choice. I had to take this company and build it. And I said, actually, you did have a choice. You could have let the company fall apart. You could have tried to pull in a partner. You could have taken an employee and said to them, listen, if you help me build this up, I'll give you part. Like you, and I said, I spent 3 seconds thinking about the choices that you had. You spent 0 time because you believed you didn't have a choice. And here's the sad part. You believed it for the last 25 years. You taught your children you don't have choices about things. And she goes, you know what? I can't believe you're saying this because my dad inherited the company business and he didn't want it either. So it was passed down to her. And I said, this is so sad because you could have had a very different life. And it's painful to see. And it's bad enough that at that moment, she felt she didn't have a choice. But that mentality just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, you know, and it's insidious.
It's real. And I mean, there's also all these spoken and unspoken expectations. There's a shitload of shame and blame that exists for any variety of situations for people, especially with women and all these multiple roles that you just discussed. But it does go back to, and I always suggest this is one of the greatest lessons my dad ever taught me, is that we always have a minimum of 2 choices, right? And even I love that you said it. My dad always said this as well. He said they both might be shitty choices. You can be held up at gunpoint and your choice is to hand over all your worldly possessions or get shot. But the second you believe you don't have a choice is when all of your power and agency is gone. And then you layer on top of that, and this is, I think, also what you're helping people do through some of the boundary work. I'm a big believer in questions because questions create options and opportunities for us to have new choices and take new actions, right? And I always use that same analogy. Well, what if you're actually being held up at gunpoint, but you aren't threatened? You don't need to react. You don't need to make a big deal. And you can actually meet that person where they are, engage, figure out what they really need. And maybe you don't have to hand anything over and your life's not in jeopardy. What if? What if, right? Most of us are conditioned to not see the expansive nature, but instead the limiting nature. And often because of how we're conditioned, which you just hit on. So I really do appreciate all of that as it relates to the power of choice. What is it that you believe leads most people to believing that they do not have a choice?
They don't make choices and they weren't given choices. And then, or they were sort of like slapped down when they tried to make choices. And I think it's like the elephant. The elephant had a choice and it pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled until it was exhausted. And then it was like, oh, this isn't going to work. So it decided, like, you made a choice to not make choices. I just realized that right now, that it's a choice. But
not making a choice is a choice. It absolutely is.
I do want to say, Brian, that just because you have victim mentality doesn't mean you weren't victimized, right? So it comes from somewhere. So it's, you can still have been victimized and not have victim mentality. Viktor Frankl is a perfect example. Nelson Mandela, another perfect example. Being in prison for 27 years doing hard labor, can't imagine anything worse. Oh, maybe being in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. Both of those men made choices while they were there. They were very clear. I get to choose how I interpret everything that's going on around me. I get to empathize with my captors. Right. So they are perfect examples. It doesn't matter how shitty the conditions of your life are. You still have choices. And for me, the greatest choice is the choice of what to think. Like, I have choices.
You have more than once alluded to situations where you either feel something or don't feel something and you know or don't know accordingly, right? Like it's the lack of congruence between what you know or what you believe and what you feel and experience, which I would suggest that the majority of interference and resistance we face in this world as individuals is between the lack of congruence between our head and our heart.
Absolutely.
What we believe and what we think and what our embodied experience would suggest and tell us. And the conflicting narratives that can take place so often because of being victimized or being down put or any other number of things that have created this belief system. The inability, I think, for so many to start to even understand boundaries and the importance of them also is because often of the lack of clarity and congruence in those two things. How did you start to be able to bring what you thought, what you knew, and what you embodied or felt into congruence And what is your process for lack of a better term, regulating between them? Because sometimes they'll both lie to you and they'll both try to tell you the truth.
Yeah, so it is an exceedingly difficult process. I think the largest distance in the universe is between the head and the heart. I really do. And I think, a big way that I have trained myself is affirmations. I know that a lot of people think that they're bullshit, but they work for me. And the way I think of it is like this, Brian. When I have been saying negative shit in my head for years, it's like I have this reservoir in my mind and I've been poisoning it for decades. And it would be nice if I just stopped poisoning it. Eventually the reservoir would purify. But the problem is your brain's job is to think. So you can't just shut off the negative thoughts and do nothing. Yeah. But when you put in the affirmations, the positive statements, it's like you're putting in medicine and you're purifying that reservoir. And the beauty is, you can say negative shit multiple times a day for 52 years. It's not going to take you even 5 years to turn that around. It doesn't take that long. And you do not have to believe the affirmations. You just have to repeat them because eventually you will start to believe them. You will stop saying the negative stuff. Like it's easier to replace the negative thing with a positive thing than it is to change the negative thing. And so I have done so much work with that. I've done a lot of mirror work where I read about this in the ACA literature and it talked about looking yourself in the eye. And I remember when I first did it, it was it was just creepy and weird. And I was crying. And I remember literally in my head saying to myself, Jesus Christ, Barbara, you're a 52-year-old woman. Why the fuck are you crying? That was my dad's voice, by the way. And I kept doing it. And so that meant I kept doing it, resisting wanting to do it. I kept doing it, even though I was crying for no good reason. I kept doing it, even though it felt weird and awkward and I didn't think it was going to work. And guess what? I now, years later, pretty much every time I go to the bathroom, I look in the mirror and I say, I love you, Barb. And I mean it. I didn't mean it in the beginning. I did not mean it. And so people don't want to feel weird and awkward, even when they're alone in the bathroom. If you're not willing to feel awkward, if you're not willing to feel uncomfortable, you're going to stay where you are. And I like to think of it as there's two different kinds of discomfort. There's the kind of discomfort of living in dysfunction that you've been living in for years and years and years. And guess what? If you don't do anything, it's going to get worse. It's just going to get worse and your life is going to get more miserable. And then there's the kind of discomfort of change. So if you are going to start engaging in these new behaviors, whether it's mirror work or affirmations or journaling or whatever, praying, meditating, whatever it is that you do, and you're not willing to go through a period of time of discomfort, then you're going to stay with the old discomfort. Yep. But if you are willing to go through that type of discomfort, it's finite and there's healing on this other side. So which discomfort are you going to pick? The one that lasts for decades? For a lifetime, or the one that eventually ends and leads you to healing? I pick healing. Yeah.
I am also a fan of affirmations. I give a clarifier though, and I want to just make sure because I believe you're actually saying the exact same thing.
Okay.
And so it's interesting. Most people who teach affirmations or even this whole latest trend of gratitude journals and things, it's an intellectual only process. Right? It is a masking. It is a fabrication. It is a mental toughness and a form of armor, right? It is a disconnect. When we were kids and we were told not to cry, just put a smile on. We were fabricating that emotion in the moment because we were told not to cry and we were going to get punished for it, right?
Yeah.
And so what I want to highlight, and this is the difference between just purely affirmations and the consistency with what you just outlined. First of all, it was accountability and consistency in a choice in a moment. If I feel this, I am choosing to rewrite the narrative. I am choosing to break this pattern. I am choosing in this moment to actively counter the negativity, which is where it begins as a choice that's purely rehearsal. And it is to a degree, purely rehearsal in the beginning, but it's the active consistency of challenging that pattern and those cells that are activating, causing that belief in the first place. And so I'm slowing it down just because because what you also did, and affirmations, if they stay only there, I don't believe come full circle like you suggested. I think you also think the same thing. Because what also you are in alluding to, even though you aren't saying it at least in that answer, is you're also going to recovery programs. You're actively seeking counsel. You are looking for the feedback in the areas that you need to explore further inward. You're asking yourself those tough questions outside of the moment of choice, right? To actively help rewire and recondition so that your experience can catch up to your choice in the pattern disruption.
Yeah.
But if you don't also do those supplementary and support things, is when it becomes just purely mindset and going through the motions.
Right.
And yet that's also why I'm calling attention to it, because any of the naysayers around I am statements or affirmations could hear how you positioned it and not hear all that's below it because of every part of our prior conversation.
Right.
And so, yes, you started with affirmations, but let's pick one. You talked about that situation with your dad. You said, this was not my voice. This was his. I actively tried to rewrite that narrative. What was the associated work beyond the affirmation that helped you close that gap?
I would say, being immersed in recovery and looking at childhood patterns and seeing the connection between the things that happened to me and the internalized messages that I had. Like intellectually, I believe it is perfectly normal for a 52-year-old woman to cry. But emotionally, it wasn't safe for me. And so I internalized that message. And intellectually, I believed I was a good and decent person. I was shocked to learn how much negative stuff was in my head. In my late 20s, I did a lot of work to clean up my negative self-talk, and I thought I was good. Then I got in recovery and I was like, oh my God, I ruminate, I catastrophize, I complain, and I blame. And I'm always like, I'm this positive, motivational, inspirational person. And I am. I'm like, not only is the glass half full, I dated a guy who said, it's not that the glass is half empty, it's broken. I go, yeah, I know a glass blower. Like, you cannot out negative me. Like, I am a positive person. And yet I had all this dreck in my head that I didn't even know was there. I was like, oh my God. So I started to see what's going on in here is playing out here. So that's part of coming out of victim mentality. I'm doing something here. And now I think of it as I was basically lobbing bombs into my own life, but thinking they were coming from externally. And so when I cleaned up my behavior, like I call these boundaries of self-containment. So things that I either need to contain or stop doing altogether. I would say 85% of the drama and bullshit of my life got cleaned up. And a huge part of that was what was going on here. Stop catastrophizing. Like, as soon as you realize you're catastrophizing, stop. And honestly, Brian, that is the hardest thing in life for me, is to not catastrophize. I do it like maybe 2% of what I used to, but it's still hard. I don't think I ruminate anymore. I'm not walking around complaining all the time. I'm not walking around blaming people all the time. Like, that has just, massively been cleaned up. But like seeing words in a workbook that tell me, like, are you doing this thing, and having me see it, and then talking with my fellows in recovery about, like, what is this journey like for you, and what do you do, and what do I do? I'm not just engaging in this, and I'm not like, I want to give an example to illustrate what you're talking about, like the people that say, oh, you can just say, like, I am rich, right? Like, you can't be completely broke and have like a 500 credit score and just walk around going, I'm rich, and not do anything else and expect your life is going to change. You have to take what I've heard called aligned action. So Bingo. You have to start living like a person who is rich. You have to start thinking like a person who is rich. You have to start feeling like a person who is rich. So the affirmation is almost like the entry point.
100%.
But there has to be other things that go along with it. So for me, one of the things that came up for me is I realized I never had a concrete thought about this, but I often, my whole life, had this feeling of I need to like back off, shrink down, get smaller, quiet down. And when I was finally able to put words to it, the words were, I'm too much. I got the message my whole life I was too much. Nobody said those words to me, but I internalized it, right? So what I finally came up with, I had to fiddle with it for a while. My antidote to that, my affirmation was, I'm just the right amount of everything. And I said it every day, multiple times a day for years. Did not believe it in the beginning. And then I started to realize, like, if I'm too much for an individual person, oh, well, they're not my person. Because there are plenty of people who are like, bring it. Like my sweetheart that I have now, he's like, bring it. You know, like every other man I ever dated was like, you need to squash that. And I did, by the way, which is why I drank so heavily and smoked so much weed and all the other things that I did, because I couldn't.
That's a full circle moment back to the patriarchy that started this conversation. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, I couldn't suppress my beingness without numbing myself. I had to numb myself.
Well, and here's the reality. You even discussed your mom being a feminist and having a job, yet your entire world was still structured around your father. Mm-hmm. So the lack of congruence in the lessons you're even being taught intellectually versus what your lived experience are, of course. Yep. And by the way, I joke all the time that I'm best in bite-sized pieces for most people, and I'm completely okay with that because that's typically how I engage and work. I absolutely
love this conversation. It is so clear that you are very, very smart. And I fucking love the challenge of this conversation. I am eating this up. I am loving it. So bring it.
So that leads me to a very clear question that you may already know the answer to. You maybe haven't considered it this way, but what percentage of your positive, bubbly, motivational outlook self is ingrained and 100% truly who you are versus your subconscious unconsciously protecting you from all the negative chatter that was also taking place?
Like my gut reaction is 100%.
To which part of the question?
That I am a positive person. I'm like, I am absolutely a growth oriented person. And that's not even a value of mine. Like I cannot not grow. And when I meet people who are like I have a friend who told me I'm done. I was like, what does that even mean? You're done growing? I can't even wrap my mind around that. And to me, growth and positivity, I can't even say why I think this, but they go hand in hand. I think my nature is positivity and it was corrupted. And the subconscious stuff to me are just vestiges of the dysfunction. It's not my nature. You know,
which is also why.
Yeah. And I identify as a spiritual being. And to me, there's a eternal pool of wellness and well-being. I don't think there's an eternal pool of suffering and pain.
No, but I think to your point, there are people that are more hardwired to see the light versus see the dark, see the positive versus see the negative. You know, and this is a dynamic that exists in our own house. I mean, I would tell you that I am inherently a uplifting, positive viewpoint. Like it'll all work out. We'll figure out a way. My wife is like doomsday prep, like to the other side. Right. And it's interesting too, because she is always afraid that if she sees something, she won't know what to do with it. My biggest concern is I'm always afraid I won't see something, but once I see it, I always know what to do with it.
Okay.
Right. And so it's an interesting like dynamic and pairing that we exist with in our own house because, you know, there's lots of negativity and things that would have derailed lots of people that didn't derail me. And yet I also had years of shame and anger and other elements that were developed as a result of it that I still was a high performer, still could accomplish all these things, but yet I did not have the congruence between my lived experience and who I believed I was, right? Which is why I always felt empty and not connected and right. So no different than even how you're highlighting it. But I would suggest that that's also why it was probably always feeling in conflict and out of congruence because you're inherently this positive person, but yet you'd have this shit in here that you probably shut off and lived up here. And so the lack of understanding here, you're spinning and you're like, well, I know this. I figured this out in my 20s. Why isn't this figured out?
Yeah.
And yet that's the exact fucking place that most people get stuck.
Yeah.
Is they learn a new thing about themselves. They learn a new tool. They learn a new way of processing. And the evolution stops there.
Yeah.
Well, I've learned this, so I should have this figured out.
Yeah.
And yet their experience doesn't have the time to catch up.
Right. And I would say, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go.
I would say that 90% of the clients that come to me are women who have done the work for decades. They know what to do and they can't fucking make themselves do it. And I help them get to do it.
So how do you become an activator in that process? And how do you take what they've known for decades and allow it to be what they feel and experience?
It's multidimensional. Like I have a curriculum and it's multimedia. So I get to people in multiple ways, verbally, visually, through reading, through experiential exercises, through talking, through processing. I think one of the best ways that I help people is when they give me really specific scenarios and I point out, this is what's going on. I hold a mirror up to them and I don't make them feel ashamed about it, but I also don't let them deny. I help bring people out of denial about their part in things. And I help them to see, just today, my private clients can message me on Telegram. So they can either voice memo or text me. And my client, we had a back and forth, probably 6 different messages back and forth. And I was telling her that in my estimation, your girlfriend is manipulating you and trying to make the situation be entirely about her. And it really has nothing to do with her. And she gets to be upset about things. You weren't asking her to change all these things. And she's like, well, what would you do if I did that? It's like, it's not about you. You didn't do that. This is about me and all that kind of stuff. And she was like, oh my God, thank you so much. And I said, I love being able to help you in the moment. So most of my clients, even if they message me from time to time, most of the time it's on the 1 hour a week call that we're processing. And they start to see oh shit, I have choices where I didn't believe I have choices. They also I do a lot of emotional work with people because the hardest part of boundaries work is the emotions, typically guilt and shame that comes up when you start actually trying to take care of yourself and put yourself first and engage in self-care. God forbid you're a mom and you try to do stuff like that, Yeah. So it's multidimensional. It's not one thing.
Well, and I think it has to be. And I think going to the point of growth and positivity, I always and frequently say the second shame and blame exist, growth and opportunity go out the window. It's almost scientifically fucking possible for you to grow when shame or blame exist, right? Whether it's towards someone else or towards yourself, right? And the combo of both makes it even worse. And what you also are suggesting in this effective mirror, you also have an ability to communicate things in a way that's so objective and non-judgmental, but very factually based that also validates their experience and makes it safe and accessible in a way that maybe has not been described to them in the past.
Right.
These same dynamics, you and I both know the concepts of shame. Many people, when they become more aware, they just become more aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves instead of knowing what to do about it. And it's this perpetual cycle because even as it's reflected back to them by practitioners who maybe don't have the layer of intentionality and heart that you do, can even reflect things back in a way that's shame-based and still has a blame component to it. So even though the intellectual connection takes place, there's not the emotional safety and permission to do something about it.
Right. Go ahead.
Every time you interrupt me, you have permission. Go for it.
I think that this comes from my work in ACA because not only do I see the root causes of my behavior, and also all my clients are doing all the things. I did all the things and some of my clients are doing this many things. So I can see, I know exactly what the fuck they're doing. I became able to see, here's what my motives were. Here's what my actions were. Here's what I was thinking. Here's what I was doing. And here's what my motives were. Whereas I was blind to it before. So I can see people's motives, behaviors, thoughts and all that stuff. And so I can point them out to them. And because I've been in recovery for so long and heard so many people's stories, even if somebody has a really different story than mine, I've probably heard something about it. And there's probably only so many root causes. And so when we get down to root cause, often a belief like I can't handle this, for example, or I can't, or or I'm trying to change other people. And just really, like, my mantra to my clients is keep the focus on yourself, keep the focus on yourself, keep the focus on yourself, keep the focus on yourself. And I say it multiple times just like that, because it's a mantra for a reason, because you can't control anyone but you. And the reason I have to say it to them so often is because their default is outward focus.
Yeah. Which I would say is also how many of us are conditioned. And that's what we then start to believe.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very specific question that was like sitting right there and it just evaporated, which tells me that it's not ready to be asked or not supposed to be asked at all. Let me recalibrate for a second, because there was a thought process that I want to jump back on. Oh, I know where it's at. Boundaries. Boundaries are a very, very important concept, very difficult for many to understand, deploy. The need for boundaries often is to put yourself into a position to actually have the world reflect back your own self-worth and value in a way that you see it, right? And doesn't also allow for emotional and financial extortion. It's interesting because so many of us who learn to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, right, also meant that everything in our world was contingent upon what we did instead of who we were. Which also makes it very difficult to say no to people, to not set an appropriate boundary, because if I don't do this, then I'm going to pay for it later, or they're not going to be my friend, or my dad's going to be upset, or any number of these other things. And yet what's interesting is the people who are most often extorted, manipulated, who lack boundaries, by virtue are actually the most fucking valuable people around, because they're the ones that everybody are coming to for help because of the value they have. It's just their inability to see it themselves and to articulate it in a way that protects themselves that they lack. I allowed for extortion in my own life in areas that I didn't understand
and
how to set boundaries effectively.
Worth.
Bingo.
Well, so I actually don't like to say what you're worth, because you're worth more than money can buy. Charge at least market value. But
the definition of self-worth is what you believe you deserve. And deserve is a trigger word for many people who have shame, because they're like, well, I've been told I don't deserve anything. Right? And so, I agree with you. 100%. Well, here's what I look at. Worth to me is not a monetary number.
Right.
Value is, and how you negotiate and garner your value in the marketplace is a direct correlation to how much you believe you deserve, and therefore what you believe you're worth. And yet that's all still subjective in perspective, because what might be a ton of value exchange for someone else might be minuscule to somebody else. And yet the impact could be completely out of correlation of those two. Like that's the funny thing about these words. So I follow you 100%. But where I'm going with this is, and I think I might have shared this with you when we were on the live. Many people view boundaries as an attempt to remove someone from your life. Or if a boundary is being set with me, it means this person doesn't want me in their life anymore, or they want me to change. And in fact, boundaries are actually an attempt to keep people in your life.
Yes.
But with different rules of engagement.
Right. Yes.
So could you define boundaries for us? Like you, I know, communicate about in all your teachings. And you've alluded to it here, and we talked about it on the other show as well. There's multiple different categories of boundaries. So help us understand boundaries overall. And then help us understand the most relevant categories that you see to be impactful for folks to adapt early.
Okay. So I think of boundaries as they're standards you have for your life, hopefully that you live up to, and therefore you have limits for yourself and for other people to uphold those standards. So a really easy example that I use all the time that most people can identify with is I have health standards. So I abused the shit out of myself for decades. I'm down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I don't drink. I don't smoke weed. I don't put myself in toxic situations. So a limit that I have to honor my standard of health is I go to bed by 10:30 at night. I don't stay up until all hours reading or watching Netflix or masturbating or whatever the fuck I used to do. And a limit I have for other people is I don't allow them to smoke in my home because I have a healthy home. So sleep is a foundation for health, and not having smoke in my house promotes my health. So I mentioned earlier boundaries of self-containment. I also talk about boundaries of self-protection. So I think that's what most people think about is basically stay out of dangerous neighborhoods. There's a proverb that I heard years ago. I thought I knew what it meant. It's a Chinese proverb, and it says it's easier to put slippers on your feet than to carpet the world. So when you don't have healthy boundaries, you're trying to carpet the world and control everybody around you and get them to be the way you want. But when you realize I can't, the world has sharp, jagged edges. Wouldn't it be a lot easier to just put slippers on my feet? So what are the slippers you can put on your feet? Stay out of dangerous neighborhoods. Don't hang around with drug addicts and alcoholics if you have a problem with drugs or alcohol, right? Boundaries of self-containment are things that I'm doing, that I get to control. Some of them only affect me. So like the rumination and the catastrophizing and all that. Some of them affect other people, like gossip. Like I created a culture of expectation at my workplace that we don't focus on solutions. We focus on problems and we talk about them and we blame the boss for everything. Then I also talk about letting good things in as well as keeping bad things out. People with healthy boundaries accept things like praise and help and support, and they allow themselves to take care of themselves. And then I also talk about boundaries of love, money, time, and energy. Often we deplete ourselves of those seriously precious resources because we're giving them away to other people, and then we have nothing left for ourselves. Or even if we do have something left for ourselves, we don't give it to ourselves. So and people also talk, like I have content on family boundaries, on personal boundaries, on workplace boundaries, on romantic boundaries. I mean, there's so many ways to talk about boundaries because they permeate every single area of our lives.
Right. I so appreciate all of the dynamics, and I would love in a different conversation probably to further evolve each one of those categories, because there's a lot that's in there, and not a surprise in the universal truths that you and I both teach, right? Like there's so much overlap in how you communicate these things. And what's funny is I've never been in a 12-step program, but people who've done work with me or come to our retreats or whatever, they're like, man, this is very similar to a 12-step program. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's packaged from universal truth.
Right,
like,
exactly. There are universal truths.
There's universal truths as it relates to how we connect, how we communicate, how we heal, how we move, energy, all of it, right? And so it's often available to us. It's just a matter of what we choose to do with it in those moments. Barb, I know you and I could talk for days.
Clearly.
And as we're coming towards the tail end of this conversation, I guess the thing I would ask you is, you're in this constant state of recovery, right? Which I appreciate, and we know the nuance of. But there are also things that sometimes we're active right in front of that might still surface as a problem or might feel like interference or resistance. Where would you say right now is your area of greatest resistance that you're either aware of or working through?
Yeah. I would say I have a deeply entrenched lack mentality that has just come to the surface in the last couple of years. And, it's primarily about money, but it's about other things as well, like energy. For example, when I'm walking up the stairs and I have 3 things in my hand, I'm automatically calculating how can I put these 3 things away with the least number of steps, like the least expensive energy, as if I only have so much energy, or if I'm going to be graded on how quickly I get it done. And so that's the area of work that, that I am working on the most, even though like I have 0 evidence of lack, 0. But I have this belief that I don't want to have, that there's not going to be enough. And it's insane. It's kind of funny, to be honest with you. I heard somebody recently say, when you're talking about money, throw the word energy in there and you'll see how ridiculous. Like there's never going to be enough energy. What? Like energy exists. It just is. Money exists. It just is.
Money is energy too.
Yeah, I know.
Right? That we've put priority and focus on in our societies and how we've structured it. But it literally flows. That's why it's called currency. It has a current to it. It comes in and it comes out. Yeah. And it's interesting to me that, I also love that you often will use a word that is not the most common word you'd hear as it relates to how you described that. Yeah. Scarcity is the term we'd hear more often than anything right now, connected to lack. They're one and the same thing. They show up in different ways, but lack is the word that you use. And on the tail end of even talking about boundaries, the really funny part about this, and I think you can laugh with me because you're even talking about how you can laugh, is it's like you're even teaching that to be able to receive in abundance is to effectively have clarity in your value, and to articulate the boundaries. And the beautiful part about all this as well is as the boundaries coach, you still are human.
Right.
And this is still your first time being human.
Yeah.
And as far as you've come, you're still figuring out things as well.
Yeah.
And so again, that comes full circle to this idea of constantly being in recovery.
Yes.
Yes, there's always something. If we choose that we can be better, we can improve, we can have a better or different experience. And you're choosing to do that day in and day out. And I'm super grateful for it.
Yeah.
There are links to your shows and because I know you have an awesome podcast that you dive into real conversations. I know you have a lot of other resources. Are there any places that you'd like to point people directly?
Yeah.
We'll be putting everything in the show notes for sure, but I want to make sure that if you have a specific place, they can find you.
Yeah. So if they want to have a call with me, if they want to explore the possibility of coaching with me, I have a 30-minute Say No Without Guilt. I almost said Say No With Guilt. Say No Without Guilt call. If you go to barbchat.net, that will take you to my Calendly calendar and you find a time that works for you.
Beautiful, my friend. Is there anything else you'd like to close us out with today from your perspective?
This was awesome, and I could probably talk to you forever.
Well, it's pretty easy when we talk truth, right?
Yeah,
Everything is transparent and real, and there's no need to justify, protect, or defend on either side, but just a flow and exchange of ideas. So I feel the same way, my friend, and I'm super grateful for how you showed up for us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And for those of you who just watched Barb flip open her lid and jump in, she is very aware of some of those early childhood elements that created and shaped ways of believing. But now that she's very aware, she wasn't always. And that's a big part of her story, is that for years she lived unconsciously through patterns of victimization, of numbing, of avoidance, to really try to just find the way to step into who she was and to be able to articulate it clearly to the world. But when we live unconsciously in these patterns, yes, it can create damage. Yes, it can create that gap between who we believe we are or what we believe we know and what we actually embody and experience. And yet she also has a complete humility and surrender, even in this moment, after all of what she's already healed through, that there's always another layer as long as we wake up and we have another chance to fight another day. The thing is, though, this path isn't about fighting. It's about surrendering and accepting and loving who you are in a way that allows you to open, receive, and connect in a way with yourself and with others that you've never been capable of up until now. Each and every one of you can follow the same path. You can follow Barb to find it, or you can just begin by asking yourself questions, making those choices, flipping open your lid and scanning your can. We'll see you next time. What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.